Oh, yeah. You feel it? Do you feel it? All right? Brendan, do you hear that? Do you hear the rumbling in your soul? All right? It's wrestling nerddom coming out after 9:40 Central in America. We're all inside. We're all watching wrestling. What's up, everybody? A fresh plate of Totino's pizza rolls because your wrestling buddies are on the virtual couch. What's up, everybody? I'm Kevin Kellam from WrestleZone.com, coming to you from the NBC Tower in downtown Chicago, the most interactive pro wrestling talk show with you. At late at night. Why? Because that's the schedule. That's what we're doing here. If you're with us on the podcast side of things, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Share the show with your wrestling buddies, and hit us up with your questions on Twitter at WrestleZone.com. If you're with us live, your questions pop up with us live in the show. We'll be covering all the latest things on the road to WrestleMania. All right, we'll be talking about that. We'll be talking about Dark Side of the Ring. We'll actually be talking to Evan Husney. Our very own Bill Pritchard got to talk with him. That show is premiering tonight on Viceland. You'll be able to see that. The new season, a very, very big story, probably the saddest story in wrestling history. The Christ Benoit tragedy, covered over a 2-hour in-depth special. We'll talk to Evan Husney within the hour on this podcast, this stream that reaches you. But the man who's with me is my tag team partner by blood, and nothing runs thicker than water. The man who kicked my leg out from my leg, all right? The man who lives in my proverbial Bret Hart shadow, all right? Honestly, all right? The maybe the Jeff to my, I would be the Jeff, right? I would be the Jeff to your Matt, correct?
I suppose so. Yeah, you're a little more artsy, a little more imagination.
You're saying I have a problem, brother. So
I'm not. Well,
come on, Al. Come on. Brendan Kellam joins me. Yes, my brother. My brother is with me. Someone who's watched wrestling with me for decades. Brendan, what a weird time in the world in general right now, correct? And wrestling is becoming a fun escape. I've enjoyed watching a bunch of old things. We had a watch party stream. These have been really fun to do for WrestleZone's Facebook page, where WWE, because they know a lot of people have a lot of extra time on their hands, they've flooded the internet with a bunch of classic free matches. And so if you've joined us on that, we've been streaming those all day long. A lot of people are like, oh, wow, I haven't seen Hogan versus Warrior in a really long time. So just fun matches to get your mind off the bed, news headlines. We'll be doing that on our Facebook page all week long. If you want to check that out, give us a follow over there. So, Brendan, no fans at WrestleMania. It's a weird time. WWE's still going on with the show. Are you more intrigued by WrestleMania with no fans or less intrigued? It comes up in 2 weeks on 2 consecutive nights.
That's a good question. I'm kind of intrigued just to see how they pull it off. There's so many things that make this one so weird.
Yeah.
The 2 nights, like you said, obviously no fans being there. It seems like some stuff might be taped in advance. So I'm expecting it to just be totally unlike anything that they've done before. So a lot of me is just curious to see how that actually works out. Judging by some of the stuff they've done week to week with no fans, it's a little different. But of course, it's been live, so now that they have more time, it might be a little bit different. So I'm very curious to see how it works out.
How much do you think they kind of play with the presentation of it? Because, I mean, I would say the television they've had to do has been pretty straightforward. There's no, I would say they've been smart in the sense of they're not trying to butter it up too much to the point where, like, there's no dubbed in fan reactions. There's no,
right.
They're acknowledging there's no fans here. They can't hide that. Do you think they maybe save some tricks for WrestleMania in terms of production wise? We've been talking about this in the podcast. There's got to be a pirate ship there. You've been having this pirate ship. They got to bring in a big giant pirate ship, right? They got to dress this thing up. They can't just have empty seats.
It seems like it. I mean, judging by them, when they're playing that pirate ship theme so hard and everything like a year ago,
Yes.
I'm guessing they had to have had some kind of set built already. And I don't know. Obviously, there's no fans that appreciate that, but it's like this kind of came as a curveball, the whole virus where they can't do that in front of people. I imagine they probably had most of the set built somewhere, right?
True.
So I won't be surprised if they introduce that somehow, even if, it's kind of ridiculous because no one's even there to look at it. But
yeah,
I don't know. I guessing that they're going to get a little more creative with the production. What we see on TV, as you said, they're not really trying to act like there are fans there. They're almost kind of playing into the point where there aren't fans there. They're kind of going out of their way to sort of show that there's empty seats and everything. And I'm kind of surprised how much that they decided to do live. Obviously, there's been the things where they've shown older matches here and there, but they haven't done a lot of like pre-recorded interview segments or, pre-recorded matches and things like that, which I think a lot of us probably expected them to do. They've done a lot of live stuff, which is actually kind of surprising. In some ways, it makes it more intriguing.
Yeah. Has there been anything? Has there been anything in particular? Because now we're like 2 weeks into them having to do this. Mm-hmm. Has there been anything in particular? Like, oh wow, that was better than I thought it was going to be.
I mean, this past week they did have some good segments. I think Randy Orton's segment's great, but everything I think in the Randy Orton Edge storyline has been. Yeah. I think that's the most well booked. It's almost disappointing there's not fans.
Yeah, because the fan reactions to Randy Orton turning on Edge and Randy Orton assaulting Beth, and there were a lot of people just screaming. You were just when they get the suspension of disbelief, Brendan. When they got me yelling, Randy Orton, you son of a bitch! When you're swearing at your TV, they got you. All right, and I know so many fans, especially on the internet now, don't want to be gotten. They want to be always ahead of it. They don't want to. Randy Orton, he gets people. He knows how to get under people's skin. And Edge coming back under these circumstances is pretty cool. It's almost a shame that a lot of these matches, I'll think this with Undertaker and AJ Styles, I wonder what the reactions they would have gotten if they got to actually interact in the ring together would have been. There's a lot of matches on here that feel really, really special on paper. But the whole thing just kind of has this cloud of no fans over it. And so many people hold against WWE. My thing is like just great on a curve, guys. Like they're working. Like everyone wants to like say like, well, I'm not even grading it 1-0. I'm grading it from like. I heard someone say this. I'm grading it from like a -5. I was like, so it's already starting out below 0. Like that's not even reasonable. Like to me, I think you should think of like the fact they're even doing it is something special. But you can't reach people. Wrestling fans, no, nothing is faker than wrestling fans some days.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, what match you mentioned? Randy Orton and Edge. Is that the match you think is selling the most people on it?
I think it would have been if we had a normal build here.
Yeah.
I think that. The one or two that I'm probably most intrigued now when you're kind of talking about how things are pre-taped and there might be some production involved. I mean, this week we heard AJ Styles challenge Undertaker to something called a Boneyard match.
What is a Boneyard match, Brendan?
I do not know.
I want to know. What is a Boneyard match? Sounds like some dude in production said, like, we could do something with bones. You know what I mean? And now there's a big giant skeleton or something like that. What is a Boneyard match? This has rumblings of being something that, to me, that could be overproduced, either good or bad. But our last episode, someone said this is going to be like the House of Horrors thing they did a few years back with Wyatt, which wasn't that great. But they've done some fun, spooky things with Undertaker in the past that everyone remembers and remembers fondly. So
a lot of the Undertaker stuff gets a little goofy in retrospect. But
come on, they're doing a Boneyard match. What else do you expect? Like we don't. Is that a casket match? Is someone getting buried? They mentioned a grave, so we're getting a buried. Why don't you just say a buried alive match? Maybe they don't want to say buried alive match. Maybe they don't want to see someone getting buried alive. They've gotten very PG about things. So who knows what's going to happen there? I know something that you definitely are going to goof on is the involvement of one Mr. Rob Gronkowski. In WWE. He was added to this past week's SmackDown. I know this is treaded territory, but I've traded a couple of texts with you and seen you goof on. He's a professional frat boy, is basically what we're getting here. We're getting a very successful NFL guy who looks uneasy in his own skin in WWE, but definitely is embracing it. What are you expecting from the Gronk? Gronk's going to get involved with somebody. He's going to tackle somebody. He's going to have a match at some point.
He has to. I don't know what to expect. It's interesting that, the host in WrestleMania has always been like the weirdest role because it's kind of really ill-defined.
Yeah.
We've had like The Rock, we've had The New Day. I think, was Kim Kardashian technically a host, or was she just like an interviewer that one year?
She's a host, but she ain't bumping for nobody. She ain't gonna sell. Kim ain't putting no one over. She would only show up if she got to beat everybody and like hit them with her finger or something like that. I don't know. Pretty ridiculous. In terms of celebrity involvement, this is an odd one, but he's a guy who's wanted to do it for a long time and is certainly a popular guy, but I don't know how much of a needle mover it would be, but it's certainly interesting. You can't say it's not a name. That's something. I mean, this is a guy who's Super Bowl champion. He's been in the headlines for years. And also he's a guy he's not super old just yet. So, I mean, if you want to do a handful of things with him, you have some time with his body athletically to do that. AEW has had to make changes with their show. They've moved it into the Daily Center, part of the Jacksonville Jaguars area. And obviously, NXT got to do that before them, except they had fans at the Performance Center. Now, NXT is going to move into doing shows without fans at the shows. And news coming out this week that NXT TakeOver, which was planned to be the Friday before WrestleMania, which would have been April 3rd, that show isn't even happening anymore. And the matches that were going to be promoted and built to on that will then be presented on NXT television. Now, NXT has been, for the majority of the time they've been going head to head with AEW on Wednesday nights. They've been, unfortunately, not at the top. They've kind of been chasing them outside of probably about a 4-week period there in November, December here. What do you think of them doing this? Because you're going to get Gargano versus Ciampa in some type of street fight scenario if they're jumping off, platforms and stuff. You're going to get Adam Cole versus Velveteen Dream and a women's ladder match. And so what do you think of this? This is a lot of big matches that they're going to give away on free television. It's not clear if they're going to be in front of fans just yet.
Yeah, it's a tough call. I mean, these days, I feel like the NXT takeovers, probably for the past couple of years, have been like the most reliably entertaining, thoroughly enjoyable kind of pay-per-views that they put together. So it's kind of a shame that, those guys don't really get their showcase on WrestleMania weekend. However, you can't complain that you're getting these matches. It will be a little different, not from those fans, because those NXT fans in particular are so engaged that I think they kind of, and they add
that's a very amplified audience. So I wonder how much gas is going to be taken out of this. I mean,
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. I think AEW took some notes because WWE got to the first week of television there where they were forced to with the travel regulations and the gathering regulations to do it. And it was just a matter of dates, right? Mm-hmm. Could have worked around the other way where it could have been a Wednesday night and everything was cut off, right? So, AEW took notes and they had wrestlers get around the ring and kind of jostle and cheer into the ring. And it added something to it. And that was a very great episode and the ratings proved it. They presented you Brody Lee as the Exalted One, Matt Hardy, some very, very exciting stuff. They've had to push back blood and guts. So, I mean, it's if anyone holds this against NXT that they have to do this, like everybody's in this spot. Everyone is challenged and kind of had their arms tied here. But I really think NXT could suffer a lot, though, too, from that.
I can't imagine what a women's ladder match would be like in front of an empty crowd. Like that's just see like a ladder spot and not get that crowd reaction.
Not get the ooh.
That's gonna feel really odd.
Yeah, and it's definitely odd. But I mean, how do you recreate it? How do you recreate an audience not being there?
Yeah, you can't do that unless you start dubbing in. And that's just extra silly. So.
Are we gonna get giant? Are we gonna get giant screens with like fans watching at home, like via webcam?
That's an alternative, I guess.
Dude, like what was there was that crazy show they joked about, and I did a watch along with it years ago. It was the AWA Tag Team Challenge, and this was this pilot show that AWA was trying to do that they thought could save the company. And they would be like, we don't have to run arenas. We can just tape everything. And we'll have like we'll use new technology. And it was just like green screens. and like the guy would walk down this like green screen walkway, and they had like a dub on each side of just wrestler, like wrestling crowd, and it was just like a 2-second loop of wrestling fans, like, and I was just like almost. And Ross Berman, part of WrestleZone, tweeted that I was like, "This is what WrestleMania is gonna look like this year," and I was like, "Oh my god, it could look like that. It'd be pretty crazy." It's all really, really challenging, and it's sort of a weird bummer though. I think the only benefit is the 2-night thing. Are you gonna watch both nights?
I mean, you got to. What else is going to be on? You got to stay in. Obviously, you're not going to go out. I mean, obviously, everyone's watching Netflix and everything. So the idea of there actually being live programming, something that even if you're not with all your friends, you could all kind of engage with. I think there's going to be a kind of there'll be like a nice kind of cathartic, social element to it when if there's something live that actually everyone's watching. Obviously,
it'll be trending number one on Twitter. It'll be trending number one on social. Yeah. I think there'll be a lot of people watching it, and people complain about WWE's ratings and this or that. I mean, Monday Night Raw and SmackDown are doing pretty well in terms of male demographics, so people don't remember that. And they've held their numbers. Their numbers haven't dropped off at all. They've sustained it on it. Imagine how many other shows that aren't on that have zero. Like, think of it this way. More people are watching wrestling right now than are probably watching any professional sport on television, because there's no, and I'm talking about AEW as well. There's no first run shows, like there's no Tonight Show, there's no late shows. They're all doing stuff online. AEW's doing that. WWE's doing it. They've already been doing that. And so they're already ahead of the curve there. And it's interesting. It's a very odd time because they're keeping up the flow of content. They don't want to be the longest running episodic television show. You've heard that over and over again. So we're coming up here in a few minutes. We'll have Evan Husney. I wanted to get comments on screen, but technical issue. Gotta love BeLive, our streaming provider. Our greatest enemy, Brennan, as you've watched my show, is my streaming provider. I believe they're funded by the great people at Radio Shack, because it is not good. So I do want to talk some wrestling stories. If we go brother to brother, if we talk Kellam brother wrestling stories, you and I have watched wrestling, I believe, since the 1980s in some form or another, in the vicinity of each other. What Kellam brother wrestling memories would you like to share? Maybe even embarrass me. I'll give you this opportunity. Would you like to share with the WrestleZonians today, the faithful to the daily?
Well, one of the biggest ones. I'm a little bit younger than you, Kev.
Yeah.
I was born in 87. One of my earliest, very crystal clear memories is SummerSlam 1994.
Woo!
From the United Center, Chicago, Illinois.
Woo! The first event ever at the UC. All right? Before Michael Jordan made the UC, you know who made the UC? Owen and Brett. That's who made it. I said Owen first, just to make people mad. But yeah, you and I got to go to SummerSlam 1994, and our older brother Bob, it was quite the authoritarian, and he was in charge of taking us to this. And I think I found out my birthday was in June and SummerSlam was in August, right? Mm-hmm. And so summer when you're a kid, I was like 11, and you were probably 8 or 9.
I was 6.
You were 6 years old.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You're quick in the math. 87. I don't even do the math. See, this is why I wasn't good at school. And so the whole summer, Bob is saying, if you guys get in trouble, you're not going to wrestle. I remember you and I bawling in a bathroom at our parents' house because we did something. I don't know what happened.
I remember.
It was me. It was me.
You were late to mass on the Sunday of SummerSlam.
Oh.
And Bob was holding it over your head. He's like, I don't even know if you should go at this point. You missed mass.
How do you remember that? I don't remember that at all, Brendan. There's no way. The only person who's not getting in this cage is Kevin. That's who's not getting in here. But I did get to the show. We went to the show in our parents' station wagon, all right?
Yes.
Or as we called it, the war wagon. Now
wood-paneled station wagon.
Yes, it was fake wood paneling. I don't know why did they make those. Those are so weird looking. If you look at them now in retrospect, you see a picture of one of those, it's like no one believes there's wood on the side of the car. So, fancy wood, they used to call it. So Bob brings all of his teenage friends at the time. right?
Mm-hmm.
And you and I have to sit all the way in the back, and like the back hub of the, like you could sit, like there was another seat. So we were faced out the car. And I'm pretty sure Bob's friends were drinking in the back seat of the car the whole time.
Yes, they were.
The whole time they went to Summerslam. I don't mean to shoot on Bob Kellam here, but I'm pretty sure as you're throwing him back for Bob. Simple beer for Bob Kellam. And
they were having a good time.
They were having a good time. We were up in like the 200s or something like that. Mm-hmm. We didn't have great seats, but you and I didn't care. We were. This is the first time we actually got to go see WWE, and I was watching it my whole life. So just to see it was a big deal. But we didn't get to see. We saw SummerSlam.
And it was the big one, too.
And we got to see one of the weirdest matches of all time, one of the weirdest main events. And like
speaking of weird Undertaker matches.
Yes. Speaking of weird Undertaker matches, we got to see Undertaker versus Undertaker? like that's what we got to see. You knew they were different. Brendan, remember I was nudging you? You know they're different because one of them has gray gloves, one of them has purple gloves.
Purple gloves, of course, yeah.
No, one of them's half a foot taller than the other one. That's how you can kind of tell them apart. And they always shoot wide, and they don't shoot close, so you don't see the guy's face, and like all this stuff. So, but they did a good job, and it was fun. But I remember watching the Undertaker come out. This is before pyro. I think they did some pyro, but this is '94. They didn't start doing pyro like completely. You got it on WrestleMania. Like I remember like when I was a kid, you got pyro at WrestleMania once or twice, like 93, 92. They did it once or twice. But like imagine it's like Hogan at his peak didn't get pyro until he like went to WCW. When I tell people that, they're like, no way. I was like, yeah, he didn't get pyro. It just wasn't a thing. It didn't become a thing until like the mid-90s. And then WCW just had a bunch of pyros, and then WWE had a bunch of pyro.
Yeah. So they had maybe like the Sparks. They had the shower of Sparks thing for a while.
They did a couple of pyro things. So as a kid, when they aren't doing pyro at all, now we're just numb to it almost. I wouldn't say we're numb to it, but unless it's a stadium and they do a ton of it, you don't really care. But I remember the Undertaker's entrance was magic. It was pure magic, and they wanted it to be very clear when the Undertaker came out that you were seeing the Undertaker, and it felt like there was a storm. I remember coming home and telling Mom and Dad there was a storm inside the arena, like that. I thought that.
That's funny.
And my brother, even though he was like emphatic, he's like, you know, it was a show, Kevin. Like he like keep telling me. I was like, I know it's a show, but they put on a great show.
Yeah. That's when they had the giant urn.
Yes.
Because the gimmick was that Undertaker needed the urn to come back.
Yes.
So Paul Bearer was going around the country trying to find gold so he could melt down a new urn. So when he re-debuted, he had the giant urn that was shooting out lasers.
Yes.
When they entered.
Yes.
So
those are the souls.
Pretty impressive.
Those are the souls he's taken. He's put them in there. But the match of the night was Owen versus Brett.
Oh, yeah.
Owen versus Brett. One of the greatest like cage matches of all time. Yeah. The ending where he laced his legs up, like every bump, the superplex they did off the cage. Like those are things that, mind you, they've done it in an indie show for 50 people that people have been like, oh, wow, whatever, and they forgot about it, and it's a GIF. But when you're 11 years old and you only get to see it on pay-per-view, you only get to see it if you're live, that is profound. I remember what cool merch did we come home with? We came home with merch. And I got the Bret Hart wraparound sunglasses.
You have to get those, yeah.
And you got one of the title belts, and that was a big deal.
Yeah.
It was a big deal. So wrestling memories with my brother. It's a good old time here, Brendan. All right, so Brendan, I should have you on again. This has been a hoot.
It's been a lot of fun.
A run down memory lane here. We'll have Brendan on in the future. Brendan, I'm working on doing a WrestleMania quiz with Trivia with Buds. You guys can check out that podcast with Ryan Buds. Really great trivia podcast. We're going to do that before WrestleMania. Hoping it may not be this week, but next week. Maybe I have you on one of those shows. Maybe you're my hot tag if I need it. I should have someone as a hot tag corner. And when we get Robert DeFilis in, he'll get a tag partner or something like that. We'll do tag teams. We'll do a tag team trivia challenge. I think that's a pretty cool. Look at that. I just made that up. Brennan, before you sign off here, March Mania, we're doing this. The theme songs. What's the best theme song? We have it up now on the WrestleZone Facebook and Twitter. Some tough competition. Undertaker has made it to the second round. I gotta double check our Brendan. Favorite wrestling theme song?
That's a tough one. It's hard to, because there's like the theme song itself and then the wrestler. In a lot of ways, those kind of, like if I had heard Real American and didn't associate with Hulk Hogan, I don't know if I would have looked at that.
Because you think you think of Hulk and he's coming out of the ring, and the theme the theme gets so tied to that pop of the person coming out.
Yeah, it's like the man makes the music, not the music makes the man kind of thing.
the man makes the title, the music doesn't make. Yes, yeah,
exactly.
That's what you're going for.
I might go. Maybe Kurt Angle's music is like the first one that really jumps to my head. That one's so you don't even need lyrics; it's so anthemic, and then you have the crowd joining into it.
The "You Suck" chant. You suck. But yeah, but it's the ceremony of that song and that person coming out. Here's what we got in the first round. You can vote on our Twitter or our Facebook right now for hashtag WZ March Mania. Stone Cold Steve Austin versus Macho Man Randy Savage.
I'm going to go Stone Cold. That's a tough one.
Come on, glass breaks, dude. I'm with you. Macho Man is cool, but it's more like Macho could come out to a bunch of different songs and still be over like Rover. I agree with you. Glass breaks. I get pumped for that every time. I listen to that before first date.
I feel like that invented like that opening pop to the theme song was so big in the late 90s when you could interrupt, like someone could be in the ring talking. And then you hear the sound, and the crowd immediately knows, oh, Stone Cold's coming out. And with the glass breaking.
It's instantaneous, like it just turns them up. Now, here's a tough one. Dusty Rhodes, all right? Ultimate Warrior. Destructicity versus the American Dream.
I got to go with Ultimate Warrior on that one. That one is just...
I'm sorry, the cowbell on Dusty's theme song has grown over me. Common Man Boogie has grown over me, man. That has grown over me. All right, we differ on that one. We differ on this one here. This one is a little bit. This is different. Okay, NWO versus Alex Riley. Alex Riley, a deep seat. Say it to my face. Say it to my face. A-Rye versus the NWO. I think NWO is going to take that one.
I would agree. Yeah.
All right. Now, there's more selections. You can vote now over on Twitter and on Facebook. Go check it out. WZ March Mania. Look up the hashtag WZ March Mania. Let's get into our special interview. Evan Husney. He is the main mind behind Dark Side of the Ring on Viceland, and possibly their most controversial episode premiered tonight on Viceland.
I'm on the line right now with Dark Side of the Ring executive producer and writer Evan Husney. The second season of the show premieres tomorrow night at 9 p.m. on Vice TV. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks so much for having me.
So, there's a lot of hype going into this season. You had a very successful first one with some stories we knew. Obviously, the Christ Benoit story is a very controversial one, a sensitive one. How did you guys go about, laying out not only this season this time around, but, using that as the season premiere?
Yeah, well, doing a television series that's kind of exploring, these types of stories from the wrestling world, it's kind of hard to ignore the Chris Benoit story. It was such a massive story at the time. And back in season 1 days, we definitely kicked it around as something that we would explore, but I'm so glad that we didn't, because I just don't think we were prepared at all to take on something like that, or really have the street cred to take on something like that. So moving into season 2, actually months and months and months before we even knew we were going to have a season 2, we started developing the Chris Benoit story as a separate documentary, perhaps, that we would make somewhere else. And so we had spent like 4 or 5 months researching the story. And in that, we sort of felt like this story was worth a reexamination, because so many aspects of that story. There's so many things now in 2020 that we understand better than we did back in 2007. Whether that's like domestic violence issues, whether that's mental health issues, both physical and emotional, or whether it's CTE, of course, which plays a part in the story. And so that's the original thought behind wanting to tackle the story. But then along the way, once we started to actually talk to people who were involved with the story, and that all happened because of Chavo Guerrero Jr., once we started talking to everybody, we realized that everyone wants to tell the story. they've had the story on their minds and on their chest for a long time now, and whether they've been told not to talk about it or they didn't have a platform to talk about it, because it's such a complicated story. It's such a complicated thing to have, someone that was your best friend or that was your brother-in-law or was your father that actually committed these crimes, and how do you come to terms with that? How do you process that? And so then we felt that just kind of all of us coming together to tell the story, that could help in some way for some sort of catharsis and hopefully a positive conversation around it.
Now, one thing I saw, you actually commented on Twitter over the weekend about, who you assembled to have included in some of the on-air interviews, and Dave Meltzer was not used just because it was a creative decision. But do you feel like the more people that you could have included maybe would have diluted the story, or do you think it's a stronger narrative coming from the people that are here?
Yeah, I mean, it was always kind of the intention to approach this story, trying to gain access to the inner circle. That was very important to us, because that's really the areas that haven't been explored in this story before, in terms of the way that it's been covered previously. And, also, just another creative decision that we have in putting together Dark Side of the Ring is that we really limit the amount of voices that you hear per episode. You never see in a Dark Side of the Ring episode, dozens and dozens of faces and voices just to get them all in there, because we try and keep it as intimate as possible, and we want it to be mostly from firsthand. We don't like to have to rely sometimes on outside voices if we can help it. That's the key. That's kind of one of the key creative aspects of the show. So for this, we really wanted to make it feel like you were really being told the story from within, and I think it has that effect, and that's something that we're really proud of.
Mm-hmm. And one thing I also enjoyed about it was, the way I watched it was in two parts, but it was very much, Chris and Eddie and the in-ring stuff, and then the end of it bridged to the murders and everything after that. So I appreciated that there was a division of that, because especially Chris Jericho in recent years has gotten a lot of flack for his opinions on Benoit. Chris his friend, Chris the murderer. Do you feel like your creative vision was realized, and do you think you accomplished the goal of splitting it up and maybe letting people separate, giving them a way to separate the two things now more than in the past?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's also just from also being a fan myself, and growing up as a fan and playing as Christ Benoit on N64 games, growing up through the 90s, and having that relationship with him as who he was as a performer. And then, of course, as we all did in 2007, it was just such a incomprehensible act, that it was so, and that's just from a fan perspective. But our whole goal with kind of part one into part two was really to show the perspective of, people who knew him, but people who knew him in the moment. Going from, knowing Chris Benoit, all the way up through his 90s career, and then up until when Eddie passes away, and then right up leading up to the event. It's kind of from the perspective that people had in the moment. And then what we wanted to do is then in part two, we wanted to cover the crimes and, cover what happened in there, and then the aftermath, of course, and then looking back and looking into what kind of led us here. And that was kind of the way that we wanted the story to unfold, because, that's kind of what it mirrors a little bit of the experience of the people that are in it, which was you didn't see many telltale signs. And then, of course, we look back, and then with hindsight, you do see some telltale signs, or you do see some other, things that you may never know because no one's here left to tell that side of it, So that's kind of the experience we wanted to create with the episode.
Do you think this one in particular is going to resonate with more fans since there's a bigger group, there's a bigger majority of people that pretty much lived through this one, opposed to some of the stories in season one or maybe coming up? Like I can sit here and tell you exactly where I was when I watched that episode of Raw, and then the next day, so it's like very much like I remember it like it's yesterday.
Yeah, I do think it is going to resonate more because it was just such a massive event, and it is one of the larger, controversial, tragic moments in wrestling that really transcended that world, and it went far beyond that and opened up other conversations. I mean, Chris Jericho in the episode talked about how it almost killed the industry. So this was, this was a massive story. So I think looking back on it, and because it's become taboo to talk about in certain ways, and it's very complicated and very triggering for a lot of people to mention his name or to show a picture of him or to whatever. It's all very complicated. So it is kind of like, how do we deal with this? Because it is part of the history, and how do we process it and how do we look at it, And I think one of the things that was very eye-opening to us throughout the whole process was just everyone we're talking to who's involved with the story, they are victims in some ways too, because they're still here and they have to deal with trying to understand this and trying to piece it together. And so I think those are the types of people that, sometimes we as fans or outsiders in the story, we forget. And that was something we didn't want to do, because when you put yourself in their shoes, it is pretty overwhelming, to try and come to terms with something like that.
Is that point about seeing the other people involved as victims, is that something maybe that changed your outlook or mindset on this subject, or is there anything you can talk about, from the process of this show, this episode, that changed your perspective on Chris?
I think it did, because I think it changed my perspective. I mean, obviously, the first time I spoke with, say, David Benoit or Sandra Toffaloni, Nancy's sister, obviously you can tell the effect that this has had on them, but spending time with them as people, and then also interviewing them for hours on end, that really resonated with me as really truthfully, because I mean some of the parts that we get into towards the back end of the second episode, those are some of the heavier, more emotional moments that we've ever filmed, and kind of capturing these two different sides of the family kind of coming together, and that, I think, for us was just one of the more overwhelming emotional moments that we've ever captured. But so that just so getting to know everyone involved in this story so intimately now, it just definitely gives you a different perspective on it. It's just hard not to.
Mm-hmm. To kind of preview a few more of the subjects coming up, you have New Jack, the Brawl for All. Owen Hart is coming later in the season. And, he's another name that, even though his death was an accident and it's tragic, he's not spoken about on TV for other reasons. And we've kind of heard from his family, it's a touchy situation with them, but what can you tell us about what's coming up? Are there any stories specifically you do want to tell that haven't been told yet? Like, you have two this season that we really haven't had an inside look at as far as like a wrestling fan and since they've happened.
Well, I mean, one of the things we try to do with stories that, are more familiar, like the Owen Hart story, is we always try and show a different perspective. And I think that, the perspective that fans and non-fans are going to see on that story is going to be totally, you're going to learn a lot, I can just say, in terms of the perspective that's going to be shared from the family, from their point of view. We're still putting the final touches on the Owen episode now, but it's really shaping up to be something truly special. And I think that is definitely going to be something that feels new in terms of the perspective. As far as other episodes, one of the ones that I'm really excited about, I'm definitely proud of the New Jack episode. I think that one explores some areas we've never explored in the show. And I also feel like the Herb Abrams UWF story is going to be an entertaining one for a lot of people, because it's for wrestling fans, it's probably a part of wrestling history that they're not as familiar with. It's a deeper cut story about a wrestling fan with a big dream to start his own wrestling promotion. And as those who are in the know, it failed spectacularly. Herb also, met his end in one of the more outrageous passings of anyone I've ever heard of, ever. So it is a pretty wild story, and I think that one is going to be one that wrestling fans, hardcore wrestling fans, are not going to want to miss.
There's definitely a lot to look forward to. Is there a story in particular that you don't think you can ever tell, whether it's access to people involved or any other particular variable?
I mean, the only story that I don't think I'll ever be able to tell, and the story that I would love to tell, is the Vince McMahon story. I would want to tell the Vince McMahon story and only have Vince McMahon in it. And it would be amazing to see the season 3 teaser trailer just open with Vince sitting in an interview position, or something. But I think that's probably a dream.
Okay.
Only a dream.
Hey, who knows? By this time, when you go to do season 3, he might have some interest, or who knows? But let's cross fingers. But in the meantime, season 2 premieres tomorrow night with the Christ Benoit episode, Tuesday, March 24th, on Vice TV. Thank you very much for your time today.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you.